Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Running Tales podcast here on the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network. We are, as you know, coming out every 2 weeks live across, all sorts of social media platforms from Facebook to Instagram to the dreaded X and all the usual ones, really. So YouTube as well. So listen in wherever you can, catch up and enjoy the stories that we tell. And we also, of course, are a podcast. And this particular one today will be out on Thursday. And I really should mention all of the other wonderful shows on our network as well, from Beyond the Finish Line to Food Fight Friday. Listen, there's loads of brilliant shows. Go and check them out because they're all excellent and they're all well worth listening to. Today's guest is Jake Griggs. Now, Jake's done a little bit of everything. He's an adventurer, he's a runner, he's a business owner, and I found him as a writer over on Substack. And one of the things I find really interesting about Jake is his desire to complete at least one physical challenge every year. That's something that's seen him hike across the Andes to Machu Picchu, walk across the Scottish Highlands, run across the Grand Canyon and swim in the Med. So yeah, he must be pretty tired. And also as the founder of Working Order Training, Jake aims to supply athletes with the tools to take on the physical challenges that they dream of, and to promote them on that Substack page I mentioned. So listen, let's without any further ado have a chat with Jake about everything he does. And hey Jake, how you doing?
Craig, doing well, man. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and for having me on board.
You are more than welcome. Listen, Jake, this is obviously it's a running podcast. I know you've done loads of other stuff, but let's start off by talking maybe a little bit about your running and how you got into it. Has running always been something you've done?
Yeah, it very early on when I first started. So I grew up playing soccer, and that was just running was obviously just a part of the game. And then I did a little bit of track in high school, but then once I got into college, running was something that I could just strap my shoes on and go out the door, if like to decompress from studying or to celebrate or just to clear my head. So really around that time, like running was 100% just like therapeutic for me. Like I would, throw music on and I would just go. Like I didn't even think about miles, or I didn't think about time. I didn't think about heart rates. Like I just went out there because I felt like I just needed to do it. And so that stuck with me through my early 20s into my late 20s. And even now, recently it took more of like a structured training, like I'm going after something. But running was always a way for me to just, one, have fun, and two, just to get outside and just to feel alive and to clear my head.
Yeah, and we were saying in the green room before the show came on that one thing you do that, I don't know, I suppose it's a 50-50 split. It's a bit of a running debate, isn't it? But you run without the Garmin, without the watch, and that's something that actually helps you as you run.
Yeah, absolutely. I just saw this great note on Substack that was like, do you run to escape or do you run to dial in? And I run to, I escape. I'm not really fond of the word escape in that context, but I think I run to dial in. And the only thing I usually have is like music. And that just kind of helps me focus on whatever it is I need to focus on, or maybe it's nothing at all. I mean, I just need to just go out and get outside. But yeah, like I don't use a watch. I've never used a watch. I think like my girlfriend probably will convince me to get one here in the near future, but I don't have one right now. Yeah.
And with that in mind, when it comes to doing the races and the challenges that you might take on, does that mean it's harder for you to be competitive when you do it, or are you quite competitive about your running races?
Oh man, that's a very interesting question. I am competitive by nature. I think as I've gotten older, I would say that I've become more competitive with myself than anything.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong. Like if I hear somebody sneaking up behind me, I can't help the urge to maybe kick it into another gear. But yeah, these days if like I know that I am underperforming, or if I know that I could go one more step or one more mile, that's usually where my competition really comes out, is with myself. And I think one of the things that I've learned through running and all these challenges is that it's a lot of it is more mental than anything. It's a mental game at that point. And so that's really where like the competition comes in, is like you start that negotiation with yourself. It's like, oh, like ease up or slow down or whatever it is. And so it's like, once I get into like that point in the challenge or that point in the run, that's where the competition really seems to come out. And it's like, okay, here we go. Like now it's time to kick it in.
Yeah, I find the sort of debate around being competitive quite interesting, really. And I mean, we have park run over here in the UK, and I know you have some park runs in America as well. And don't get me wrong, it's a fantastic organisation, but increasingly the stats are disappearing, and the whole idea of people daring to run it fast is almost sort of frowned upon. And I don't understand it. I'm not the fastest in the world. I'm not the slowest in the world. I don't even really like those phrases, but it's kind of like I love to see somebody run it in 16 minutes because I just find that incredible. And I love to see somebody who's running it for the first time or for whatever reason run it in an hour and 10 minutes. It's all cool.
It's amazing, and I think it's just a testament to like what the human mind, body, and spirit is all capable of, right? And that's the wonderful thing about it, is that it's like on a sliding scale. Like you can have somebody that's running, going after a 3-hour marathon, and it's like really pushing the limits, But then you have somebody in that same race who is doing like, doing their first marathon, and they just want to get it done. And getting it done is pushing the limits to them. And that's wonderful. I think both of those stories are like fantastic. And it's just a celebration really of like what everybody is capable of. Like it's amazing. I think it's just so cool.
So as I sort of mentioned in the intro, challenging yourself is something that you like to do.
Yes.
Where did that mantra come from? And then perhaps if we can kind of segue into some of the challenges that you have taken on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it started really in like the late 2000s, like 2018, 2019 is really where it kind of, the seed was planted. And I'm a big fan of Jesse Isler. He's an American entrepreneur and public speaker, and he's just an all around great dude. And he has this thing of like a misogi, but he kind of paints it more in like physical challenges, yes, but it could be like a spiritual challenge. It doesn't have to live in the physical realm. I obviously approach it from more of like the physical element. So that was really kind of where like the concept started to take shape. Was when I found that out. But then ever since like 2018, 2019, I've just committed to like, hey, I'm going to do this once a year. I'm going to train for something and I'm going to knock it out.
Yeah. So yeah, tell us some of the things you've done, because you sort of given me quite a long list, but
yeah. So I mean, it's been like, I know we're on a running podcast, but it's been across the board. Like I love to jump around and try out different things, because I found that like the lessons learned transcend no matter what activity you're doing. But let's see, I've climbed Mount Rainier here in the States. I recently did the Grand Canyon Rim to Rim, which is a trail run across the Grand Canyon. I've done the W Trek in Patagonia. I've done the Salkantay Trek to Machu Picchu. I've done a solo backpacking trip in Scotland. And right now I'm training for a 100-mile bike ride, which is coming up in October.
Yeah. While you're out there doing those things, and perhaps as well while you're training for those things, what do you learn? Is it stuff you're learning about yourself, about the world, or a little bit of it all?
I love that. It's a great question. It's a little bit of it all. I think that's why physical challenges are so wonderful, is because they really push you to the limits, right? And I just interviewed this woman who had this brilliant quote. She said that like you reach a certain level of exhaustion to where the things that really need to have the floor, like the things that you really need to focus on, like they have the stage, right? Because the noise of your everyday is it's stripped away, right? Like there's nothing there for you to like be distracted with, like whether that's your phone or like traffic or whatever it is. And so you really have the space to kind of navigate whatever it is that's going on internally or in your life. And so I've had things that have come up, like things like, the idea of like being alone versus being like feeling loneliness versus being alone, right? Like kind of like some of those like more like philosophical things. But then, you kind of also come away with ideas of like lessons learned that like you're capable of more than you think you are, right? Like all these challenges that I do, I try to do one that I think is like one or two steps outside of my comfort zone. Like the backpacking solo, like I was properly intimidated by that. But then you come away and you're like, damn, like I did it. Like I've just set a new standard. I've just set a new threshold, and you've changed because of that. And so that's always like the biggest lesson for me is okay. Like I can draw more from my well. I can do more than I thought I was capable of.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you're saying about choosing new challenges that sort of push you to be a little bit frightened of them, to the next level of your limits. Jason Bahamundi, who regular listeners isn't it, here will know, sits behind the screen and produces stuff, and occasionally likes to chime in because he runs his own podcast, so he's always got questions. Part of the network, folks. So do listen into what Jason does too. But he's sort of thinking, well, maybe riding 100 miles might seem a bit easier. I suppose it depends how good a cyclist you are compared to some of those other adventures. But so does that training for that 100-mile bike ride scare you, or is it easier to handle that because of some of the adventures you've done in the past?
I don't think it's easier. I think I've done enough now that I'm just better at handling the stress, and I'm more confident going in, because the longest bike ride I've ever done was only 15 miles, right?
Yeah.
And the 15 to the 100, like that's a pretty large gap, but I'm confident that I can train, and I can get through the training, and I can get through it because I've had these experiences now. So I think it's always hard. There's always days where I'm like, this sucks, or I don't want to do it. Like last night, I had an hour and a half kind of just like a normal bike ride, and everything was going wrong. Like it was a bad ride by all accounts, but you do it, you get through it, and then you move on, and you always try to take something from that. So it's never easy. It's never point A to point B, right? It's never like a linear thing. But that's kind of what you sign up for, right? That's part of the fun, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've spoken to people who've gone on to do triathlete before, and I think triathlon before, and I think quite often that either starts with running or one of the disciplines. And what I always find fascinating is they'll go and tell me, when I started this, I've never swum before, or I've never cycled before. And as somebody myself who I'm not a very good swimmer, I'm not even a very good, well, I'm a terrible cyclist, frankly. I can't remember the last time I cycled. I don't know how people can get that in their head of, like, running for me just seems so natural. Even when I'm bad at it, I can run, but doing stuff that I've never done before seems such a huge jump into the unknown. But I suppose that's part of it.
Yeah, and I think that's why the stories that like you're sharing and this podcast network is sharing, because when we were talking offline about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, I think that's why storytelling is just so important, especially now, where we have access to all these wonderful athletes doing all these amazing things, but that can just seem so far out of reach. And I think that like you kind of get into this period of stagnation, and you want to go right to action, but that gap just seems so vast, or you don't know what to do. And so I found that to bridge that gap is, you need inspiration, and you need to see people maybe not exactly like you, but maybe have similar life experiences, or something in their story resonates. So you need to see these types of people doing the things that you want to do, for you to be all like, oh, like I can do that. Like I can do that. If they're doing it, I can do it. And so I think that's why stuff that like what you're doing on Running Tales is just so important, right? Like you're showing people that you are capable of doing amazing things.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I want to get onto a little bit about some of the writing and some of the training that
Mm-hmm.
you do, but yeah, my thought on it always when we were doing Running Tales was that there are so many people out there writing about how to look at your watch to do the right thing, what to get the correct splits, what your VO2 max should be, and I was like, oh, do you know, this is fascinating for the right people, but for most people, I don't think they give a stuff until they get to that stage where it matters. It doesn't matter. It's just like for someone who's been sitting on the couch for 5 years and doesn't get off, that's just no thing. That
Yeah,
ain't like VO2 max.
exactly. I think like a lot of the information that you see is very practical and it's very rational and
Hmm.
it's important stuff. But to your point, like somebody that's never ran more than a 5K, all of a sudden you start talking about pacing and splits and VO2 max and zones and everything. You're like,
Yeah.
whoa, like inspire me first and then give me the tools second.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and actually, sometimes I mean, we've had some fantastic guests on here, people who've done huge mileage, people who've done adventures like you've done, and so on. Uh, um, and what I've started to try to do is not have an Olympian every week. Not that they always want to come on, but you know what I mean. But to have the more normal people. And sometimes I sort of think, actually, do you know what, Craig? You need to dial this back even further and get the person who's done their first 5K last week, because that's your first sort of step in the line of that inspiring journey.
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed one of the best conversations I've ever had on my newsletter was a woman that walks. She walks every day,
Yeah,
and she walks. I think she's already walked like the circumference of the Earth, like astronomical number. But she
yeah,
walks every day. Like that is her meditation. That is her practice, and it was one of the most fascinating conversations. It's walking is like the definition of it's simple, but it's not easy. And the fact that she's just been doing this every day for years was like, this is so impressive.
yeah, definitely. So tell people about the Substack that you do, and how that all works for you and some of the stories that you tell.
Yeah. So very much similar to what Running Tales, but it's all focused on um, ordinary people doing extraordinary things with their fitness. And so I really aim to kind of tell the background of the athlete and the background of whatever challenge it is that they're pursuing. And then the idea is to really balance that inspiration with then more like practical information. So you have the background, but then you go into kind of what was their training like? Like what was their nutrition strategy like? What was their gear kit like? And then what were these sort of major takeaways or lessons learned from that experience? And so the idea is to really kind of build this library of athletes and challenges. So if anybody was like interested in doing the rim to rim, or was introducing or interested in doing like swimming across Lake Tahoe, like they could go to this story and they could hopefully be inspired, and then they would have like some sort of something to anchor themselves to and be like, okay, this person approached it this way, this person approached nutrition this way, and then that would give kind of set themselves up for success if they wanted to pursue something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I do have a follow up to that, but I'm going to before I forget, I'm going to give you a chance to just give the Substack a shout out in terms of where people can find it.
Oh yeah, I appreciate that. It'd be great if you wanted to hit that subscribe button. It's called Working Order, and you can find it on Substack.
Yeah, so definitely check that out. I've been reading it this week and before, and there's some fantastic stories on there. And actually, Jake, the one I wanted to mention was I think it's your latest one, but certainly one of your latest ones, which is Yasmin, who
Mm,
cycled around Iceland, and I mean, just her achievement was fantastic. I think it was 800 plus miles cycling around there in the wind. But what I
oh yeah.
found really interesting was kind of her backstory and how she
Mhm.
was trying to do something amazing in business. It didn't quite work out, so she sort of went, "Oh, sod it all! I'm going to go do something else amazing instead."
Yeah, that's a great example. Yasmin was such an inspiration. Just everything about her story, like you said, and she is a great example of somebody that had wanted to do an adventure, but kept putting it off. And then, and then life kind of inserted this break
Yeah.
in her timeline. It was like, now is the time to do this. And, she, like I said, she went off and she completed this amazing 820 miles, basically solo. Like, she had a crew, but she spent most of the time alone on her bike, cycling around Iceland, which I still am like having a hard time like comprehending that.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to go to Iceland last year, mainly around Reykjavik, but did a couple of sort of tours out into the country there, and it doesn't take long until you're in the middle of nowhere.
Oh man, like some of the pictures she sent me and some of the stories that she was sharing that I just wasn't able to get on in the story. So I send out the recording after the story goes, so you'll be able to actually hear the recording. You'll get more of like the details of everything. But yeah, when I was doing research on Iceland and all of its regions, I mean, it is, like you said, it does not take long for you to go from like city to Mars.
Yeah. When you're listening to some of these stories with your own kind of adventuring background in mind, do you ever listen to them and go, "Oh man, that's the one I want to do next year"?
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, like everyone. Actually, I interviewed a runner. Her name is Jasmine. So Yasmin, but Jasmine.
Yeah.
She is a trail runner, and she did the Trans Gran Canaria in the Canary Islands, and that looks epic. So I think that is the next running one that I'll do, and that'll be in like 2026.
Yeah, yeah. And when you're training for these, just to go back for the running events, when you're training for these really long runs, what sort of training do you have to do? What kind of mileage do you have to go up to before you take on a huge event?
Oh, I think there's several schools of thought, like one, like, the marathon, it's like you train up to like 20 miles or so,
Yeah,
and nothing really above that. And so I think like when we did the Grand Canyon one, we worked up to 17 miles. So it was 24 miles and change, and we worked up to 17. And so with the Trans Gran Canaria one, which we haven't decided on yet, but I think it's going to be a 50 miler. When we approach that, I think the way that I'm kind of thinking about that one is not necessarily like progressing all the way up until like 42 miles or whatever, but it's more of like, getting like significant mileage in like the 20s, maybe even like the 30s, but then doing that again. So like Saturday, Sunday sort of thing. So like really kind of getting the legs used to, running on tired legs sort of thing, running on a tired mind. So that's how I'm approaching this now. Because whenever I do a challenge, I write the training program for it. And there's always a level of, I don't know what's going to happen, right? It's a massive experiment, and I'm fortunate enough that I have some friends that are willing to go to do it with me. But that's kind of the fun part too. You kind of you figure it out. You figure out the nuances of it, and then eventually you really get it dialed in, and then that's really when the fun starts.
yeah, and presumably, I mean, particularly with the running over that distance, it's persuading yourself to do a lot of it a lot more mindfully, potentially a lot more slower than you potentially normally would.
Yeah, actually, so when I going back to your original question about running, when I would run, I would sprint like I was, just as fast as I could for as long as
Yeah,
I could, and then I had an injury. I got nerve damage on my left calf, and so that forced me to like slow down. So I can't run nearly as I can't sprint nearly as like I used to. And that was like a huge ego check for a while, because I wanted to go, but once I kind of like worked through it and I reframed it, going slower has actually been, almost better than running fast, just because you kind of you sit with the experience more, and you sit with your thoughts more, and it doesn't become this idea of like I got to get it done. It's
Yeah.
more of like an enjoyment factor, and you notice things more too, right? Like you notice your breathing, you notice your thoughts, you notice what's going on around you, you notice other runners. It's been a real blessing to start to tackle more of these longer distance races, because you kind of have to go slower mixed with like my legs. So it's been great.
Yeah, I'm probably going to get regular listeners to Running Tales sort of putting their head in the hands and going, "Oh, Craig's going on about this again." But I do like to sort of talk to people about how running slow is just, I think, one of the best things in the world, or running on something tricky like a trail or out in the countryside, and stopping and taking photographs, and not really worrying if you need to do your shoelace up, and stopping some people, you obviously don't run with the watch, but I've seen so many people will get to a traffic light and stop their watch to save that 30 seconds on their Garmin, and you're like, really, what are you doing? And for me, the bizarre thing about it is, since I've started to do that, when I have done shorter, more competitive races, my times have all improved. And it just seems to be a strange elixir that you run slow and you run far, and you get
Yeah. But I think there's also too like room to let the horses run.
yeah,
I think that like, at least for me, like I do kind of have this like desire to just like open the tank, like empty the tank and just go. And so I think like when we approach this next event, this next running, we're going to work in a lot more of like explosive movements, right? Like explosive step ups, like really trying to be more of like a powerful runner, and then also working in some like interval movements. So like really balancing those two competing desires of wanting to go slow, or needing to go slow but wanting to go fast, and just really focusing on like the time and the place. But to your point, like you kind of have to really let your ego just stay at home,
yeah.
and just settle into kind of like that zone where you can just cruise.
And the other thing you do, Jake, which probably fits into that, is you help other people to achieve their goals, and you set out to coach them to do whatever their dream might be. How long have you been doing that, and kind of how did that come about, I suppose?
So I haven't been doing that piece too long. It's only been about like 6 months. That really came out of like my love for training and for pursuing physical challenges. Like I listened to this podcast this morning, and it's with David Hyatt, who owns the like Do Lectures, and the Denim Company, and he was interviewing this gentleman, and he said it like this. He was like, "Don't seek to create magic, but seek to create the conditions for magic to happen." And that's kind of how I view, or like that's like my approach to coaching is, the value that I provide is simply just like providing the structure and the environment for people to then realize that they're capable of wonderful things, right? Like the physical challenge itself and the training for it and the pursuit of it, that's where all of like the value comes, and that's where all the lessons learned, right? Like I have gotten immense value from it, from them, and I want other people to experience that value. And so that was really where the desire came from, was like, man, like, I am learning so much about myself and life and the world, and I'm having so much fun doing this, and I'm meeting so many wonderful people, and like there's just so much happening, and like I want to share that with others. And so that's kind of where that coaching piece came from.
Yeah. And when someone you're coaching achieves their goal, does
Oh,
that give you even more pleasure than when you're doing something yourself, or is it hard
oh
to?
yeah, I would say so for sure. Like it's like a friend of mine just did her first triathlon, sprint triathlon, and this is wonderful, and the swim scared the devil out of her. And I recommended that it was an open water swim, and so I recommended that they do like a prep race. It's like just a month ahead of time, just try to find something similar distance, just to get the experience. And she sent me a photo, and she had to be like escorted out of the lake because she panicked and she freaked out. And I was like, hey, everything's okay. Like, this is why we do it. We'll, you still have a month left. We'll dial it in. We'll be okay. And a month later, she sent me a photo and she crushed her triathlon, like smashed the swim. And like, that was so cool, right? Because a month ago, they were concerned that they couldn't even complete the swim. And now they're doing some things, and now they completed a full triathlon. Like, that is just amazing to me. And I'm so proud of her. And it's just so cool when you see that light switch, and they themselves then realize that they are capable of more than what they think they are. And that moment is worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, 100%. My wife actually does some coaching as well, and she's done things where even down to a 5K park run, she'll run around with them, and the joy on people's faces when they do something they didn't think they could ever do is incredible. Jason says actually as well on the triathlon, and I've had triathlete friends say this. He says like that, talking about his first swim, and he's done 8 Ironmen now. He says his first was in the pool, and he spent time walking up and down the lane to catch his breath because he was so worried and so frightened of getting in that pool and doing that first swim. So yeah, I think it's a thing. But what hopefully we're showing is that you if you can take that deep breath and dive in, literally in this case, then we can all do anything, can't we?
Oh yeah, yeah, and another friend of mine who is a brilliant runner. She is also a running coach. She has this wonderful idea that like the actual challenge itself is the celebration of all of your months, maybe even years of training and preparation. Like that, the stuff beforehand is the hard part. Like that should be where you're concerned if you can even do this. Like by the time you get to the challenge, there should be no doubt in your mind. Like, oh, like yeah, I can do this now. And I love that idea. I love that idea that like in the pursuit of a goal, you often learn more than than doing the actual thing itself.
Yeah. So when people first come to you as a coach, and I know it's all fairly new still, but do you think at that point they've already taken what is effectively a really big and an effective step on that journey, but by not only choosing to have you help them or somebody help them as a coach, but by entering that event, changing their mindset in that way?
No doubt. Excellent question. That is by far just like saying, hey, like I want to do this.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I can. Like one, the vulnerability there is off the charts, right? Just to say you want to do something, but you don't know if you can, like that is amazing, right? And so I think that is the most important step, is that moment where you be like, I think I can do this. I need help, but I think I can do this. And I think that's, if you can get there, myself or another coach, anybody, another can then take you the rest of the way, for sure.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And sometimes, I mean, this might be me having a therapy session with myself, but actually one of the things I find quite interesting about some of the runs I've done, and I've done some reasonable distances. It doesn't really matter, but I think sometimes I actually look at those people who've gone out from a lower base, because I always played sport. I've always done running. I've always done this. It's kind of second nature. I don't remember I probably had to make those first scary steps at some point, but I was probably 5 years old. And I think probably having to do it at 25 or 45, that's just so much. I'm so amazed by those people.
Oh, I know. I interviewed this woman who is, I think she's in her late 70s now. She didn't start swimming until she was in her 50s. And she is now a Guinness Book World Record holder for open water swims. When I spoke to her, she was making her way through this challenge called the Stillwater 8, which is like swimming around some of the most famous lakes in the world. And she was 75 when I talked to her. And she is just cranking out these swims. And, a lot of the people that I speak with actually didn't start what they're doing until later on in life. They just had that growth mindset to where like, you know what, like I can do this. And that's another reason why I like to bounce around challenges, right? Is because I'm kind of forced in some ways to start from square one and to be a beginner again, and to have that humility and to have that curiosity, right? I think it all comes back to a lot of ways to curiosity, is to say like, okay, like, how do I figure this out? Like, how do these pieces fit together? Can I go one more step? Can I do this? What if I did this? What if I did that? And I think being open to that and being open to those experiences and being open to failure, right? And being open to not succeeding is just a valuable lesson that transcends fitness. You know, that applies to all areas of life.
Yeah, you've actually bounced me back to a question that was going through my mind earlier, and we moved on. But and that is that how much do you kind of think taking these adventures, taking these big sporting steps, doing these events can help? Well, have helped you, but also can help everybody else with everyday life, which is, it's sometimes hard, isn't it? But it's, I don't know if resilience is the right word or what, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the gym fitness training is I can't think of another way to bring conceptuals like discipline and commitment and consistency and all those things that people strive for to life. Like, you're not gonna complete a challenge if you're not disciplined. You're not gonna complete a challenge if you're not consistent. You're not gonna complete a challenge if you don't hold yourself accountable, right? And so I think that pursuing these things is just such a wonderful way to kind of bring those things into life and bring them to the forefront, to where you have to adopt them. You have to learn how to do those things in order to complete the challenge.
Yeah. Cool. No, that's amazing. I think it's so true. Just looking at your own kind of running journey, those adventures. What was your favorite of those runs? Was it rim to rim?
Oh man, yeah, for sure. That was like just such a memorable experience for so many reasons, right? I did it with a great group of people. There were several people that we went with that had never run longer than a 10K on the road. And they were like, yeah, I'm going to run across the Grand Canyon.
Wow.
Let's go. And so watching their progression was a joy. I learned so much personally about myself and about just, how to approach certain situations. And then the actual event itself, like, it's a beautiful, like, if you've never been to the Grand Canyon, like, I had never really spent a lot of time there. And so my first real experience there was like going down to the bottom, and it's wonderful, right? It's beautiful. And there were just so many highs and lows emotionally, physically. And then you get to the end and you kind of like, it's so emotional. Like I cried at the end, right? Because it's just like you spent so long preparing for that, and then it's done, and you kind of just sit back and you're like, damn, like, that was awesome.
Yeah, and did I mean, you spoke about sort of drawing up some of the plans and doing the training. Did it all go to plan, or did you have any sort of disasters along the way, like most
We
of us?
definitely had some curveballs. I think the training set us up to handle those curveballs, but you can't, like, for instance, like, there's a section of the Grand Canyon called the Box, and it's notorious for being the hottest and the most dangerous, because it's like these granite walls are like, like this, and heat is just radiating off you, and so you really want to make sure you get through the box before the hardest part of the day, which we did. But we were moving slower than we thought we were, and then we had to. And so when we got out of the box, there was a record heat wave moving through the Grand Canyon at that time. And so when we got out of the box, we thought we were going to have some sort of relief from the heat, but we actually just stepped into a frying pan, because it's like super exposed. The sun is beating down on you. And so like right around that time, because we were moving slower, we actually ran out of water. And so there was like a 4 or 5 mile stretch to the next rest stop, which was like, okay, you got dialed in now, Jake, kind of having to like really check your inner monologue, really be like, okay, like this is where you need to really dial it in. So that wasn't pleasant, but
Yeah.
we survived.
What I kind of love about that is the how hard something is, which on a on a normal day would not necessarily sound that hard. And what I mean by that is, oh, Jake, you got to run 4 miles, 5 miles without water. Well, it's
Nope.
fine. And
Yeah.
then
Okay.
suddenly in that scenario, understandably, it becomes the hardest thing in the world. And that for me is the challenge, isn't it?
Oh yeah. And I think, and that's it. And one of the best lessons I learned from the Grand Canyon was in that experience. And it was, for me, the best way to get through that scenario was to stop focusing on myself and to stop. I was like, hey, like I am like, stop, like everybody's hot, like everybody is tired and everybody is sore. And so I was like, how can I help others? Like, how can I help somebody else get through this moment? And once I kind of shifted my mind's eye away from how I was feeling to making sure that everybody else in the group was like, okay, like we're going to get through this. We're going to be okay. That helped me. And so that was like a brilliant lesson in that moment.
Yeah. And I bet you enjoyed that water once you got to the next aid station.
Yes, we definitely took our time at the next rest stop, and I took a couple extra sips.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I wanted to talk to you about Machu Picchu because it's somewhere I've been to, and I did the Inca Trail on the way there, and yeah, I just found that one of the most stunning places in the world. What was that experience like for you? Because I don't know this, but I'm guessing your challenge probably involved a bit more of a twist than the normal tourist trek.
Yeah, that was my first actual like multi-day hiking experience.
Yeah.
So very naive, very, very naive. And we used the service, and so there were porters, but you're still walking, 15, 20 miles a day. Like that's hard, and through the Andes, right? So it was a wonderful experience. I think that was really kind of where like the seed was planted of like, oh my God, like I can do this. Like I can go to these places. But your point about the normal hiker, that it's funny you say that, because the mantra on that trip was like, always do the hike. And, because I had 4 days of hiking, which gave me new experiences. It gave me new perspectives on life. And when I got to Machu Picchu, I felt that like I had earned the right to see it in a way. And it meant a lot more to me, because I savored it more, and I really tried to wring the experience dry just to soak up every last bit of it. And then as I was leaving, I'd see these people get off the buses, and they're like in joggers and, freshly showered and shaved. And I smelled a high heaven, and yeah, I look like a psychopath. And I wondered if like what their experience was going to be like. And so, my friend and I had this mantra where it's like, always do the hike, right? And it was really a great life lesson. Like there's 2 ways to get to any sort of goal or any sort of aim that you have. And now you can do the easy and convenient way, or you can kind of go the challenging way. And, I think if you always choose the convenient way, you really deprive yourself of so many wonderful lessons and experiences and perspectives. So I always try to remind myself of that, like with growing this podcast or with writing. Like it's not easy. It's not easy. It's a real grind sometimes, but always do the hike, and it'll be worth it.
I definitely agree with you, on the life lesson, but more particularly on Machu Picchu. And when we did it, we saw people arriving on the train, and you've got to be fair. Some people were maybe in their 70s, so they probably couldn't have done that. Actually, there are some people in their 70s who do that hike, but you know what I mean. But some of the things, Machu Picchu itself is stunning, but some of the things I saw on the trail I think were even better potentially, and potentially because you didn't. And again, this comes back to what we're saying. You didn't expect them to be there; they just came out of nowhere. And
Yeah, so true. And like when we were in Patagonia, my friend and I, there was a day where we didn't talk for like 5 hours. You know, like we were there, but
yeah,
we next to one another, but we were just so lost in our own thoughts and our own observations and our own stories. And it was a brilliant moment, a
yeah,
very, and to your point, it's just like, you wouldn't have gotten that anywhere else, like that, those little moments along the way really make the end result like that much better.
yeah, 100%. It's made me think. Actually, I'd love to. You mentioned the porters. I'd love to get one of the porters on this podcast because they
Oh,
are unbelievable.
just, you want to talk about like built different. They are just some of the most, all physical prowess aside, some of the most kind
Yeah,
and generous and like wholesome, welcoming people you will ever meet. They just, and then they're just machines too, but, um, I still kind of keep in contact. Like there's one of the guys that was a guide. He, like we were friends, and we were kept in contact for a little bit afterward.
yeah. No, the guys on ours, they were just like doing the same hike we were in half a quarter of the time, putting all our tents up, making us dinner for when we arrived, and then they were telling us in the evening, "Oh, we normally run this."
Yeah, so it's just like, okay.
There's another level. It's another level. So yeah,
Never, yes, it
if
always
anyone
always
if
is.
anyone listening to this is we've somehow managed to reach out to Peru, and you're a reporter on the Inca Trail, get in touch.
Yes.
We'll get you on the podcast, or we'll get you on with Jake, because we'd love to talk to you.
Oh man.
Yeah, that would be really cool. What was I going to ask you? Sorry, I lost my trail there slightly. I tell you what, I'm going to change tack slightly, Jake, and we have a sister podcast in the within the network called What's in Your Earbuds.
Okay.
That is basically all about the music that we listen
Oh
to when
no.
we're out running. And I know you said that you like to listen to a bit of music as well. So yeah, give us there's actually a playlist for this, so we need to get you on adding some music to the playlist perhaps as
Oh
well.
man. Oh man. It
What's
is
your selections?
so. Oh god. Okay. So it's either one or two things. I listen to like DJ music. Like
Yeah,
there's this artist called Griggs or Big Gigantic that I listen to, and or I'm such a nerd. I'll listen to like, it's like motivational like movie monologues, but they're set to like inspiring scores.
right.
And so you have, like Al Pacino giving his monologue from Any Given Sunday, but it's to like a score written by like Hans Zimmer. And
Yeah.
next thing you know, you're sprinting up this hill. It is, you want to talk about getting the blood flowing, put one of those playlists on, and whew, you'll be shaving minutes off your mile time.
Yeah. So is there a particular one that really gets you going above everything else?
Actually, it's funny. Jason was messaging me. He knows the exact speech that I'm talking about. And there's like this one moment in the speech. He's giving a speech to a locker room full of football players. And he's talking about the game of inches, and life is a game of inches. And he was like, there's this moment where it's like, you got to choose to fight back. And at that moment, like the music drops, and you're just like, you're just going, you're just moving. It was just like there are times where like I'll like audibly like say something to myself, or like I'll yell, and people around me are like, what's this guy doing?
Yeah, Jason's saying that he recently did Tahoe 200, or well, he did part of Tahoe 200, and I make part of sound like as not much as it was, because I think he did 50 odd miles with Om Gandhi, who is the co-owner of Run Bike Try, our people behind the Everyday Podcast Network. And yeah, he said he played that speech to Om when he was struggling, and played it out loud to him, and just got him going again.
Oh yeah, it's whatever you need to find that next level. You should do it.
Yeah, and so people listen to this wondering about what's in your earbuds. It's going to be on YouTube, the YouTube channel this afternoon, on the Run Bike Try site tonight. So yeah, go and check out the latest episode of that. It's really cool. And I'll if I remember when I get this up on Running Tales, I'll put a link to it as well, because it's yeah, well worth a listen, and we'll get you to add some of that inspirational music or some of the DJ stuff on there as well, Jake.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, everybody. Yeah, like I said, it's that special sauce.
Yeah, and is, you know, along with music, is how important is getting nutrition right, and is there you have go-to nutrition when you're on some of these runs and cycles and adventures generally?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm really glad you brought that up. You know, I think like the physical piece gets a lot of attention, but you know, a great way to fumble at the goal line, if you will, is to just disregard the nutrition. So I think, you know, some of the things, some of the rules of thumb that I follow is experiment during training. So if I want to try like a new product or a new strategy or a new approach, I'll do it early on, just so if my stomach doesn't like it, it'll let me know. And I always opt for food that I like, real food, you know. So like I'm not a big gel person, and I can do bars up into a certain point, but I always prefer real food and food that I don't have to be hungry to eat. And then like for like the rim to rim, like we started upping our carb intake on the Wednesday beforehand. So really typing off those levels to make sure that, you know, we had enough energy to ready to go, instead of like, you know, gorging yourself the night before and then feeling like sluggish or heavy the next day. We started pretty early. And so that was something that was really beneficial for us. And I'm not a fasted runner. I like running on a full stomach. And so, like for a lot of our longer training runs, like I would wake up pretty early and I would have a full breakfast, and my normal breakfast. And then, but you know, for the rim to rim, like we started running at like 5:30 in the morning. So I'm not going to have like my normal breakfast at 4. So like I love oatmeal fruit, and peanut butter. Like that's always a go-to for me. And then another runner friend of mine, he uses what he called it like a slow drip strategy, and I don't know if that's like an actual term, but he always eats, like he would have like specific checkpoints in his mind that he developed ahead of time, to where he's like, okay, like every hour on the hour I'm going to have X amount of calories, so his body is always have something running through it. You know, because I know like some people will have like a bar or like something like halfway through, you know, and whereas like he was like, I'm gonna have something all the time. And so that was a strategy that really worked for me. But at the end of the day, it's like it's so nuanced, like especially nutrition. Like you just have to find what works for you, which goes back to that idea of like do it early, do it during training, because the last thing you want to do is be like halfway through a 100-mile race or whatever, and you have stomach issues.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think there's a few ultra runners we've spoken to before who they've all got their own little story about when things do go slightly wrong on the day. But I think the other thing that I find interesting about the nutrition thing is the number of, you know, you talk about first time mistakes, if you like. It's you can get your nutrition right on the day potentially, but actually it's a whole run up into that, isn't it? It's not
Yes.
just even practicing with them in previous runs. It's, you know, there's no point eating all these wonderful things on the day if you've been eating nothing but burgers when you've been training, I suppose.
You know, I think that's a really, you touched on something really, really, really nice there. It's like my approach to nutrition doesn't change a whole lot when I'm training. If anything, I just have to eat more just because I'm putting my body under more stress.
Yeah.
And I think that like something that really helped for me was starting to think of like performance and food go together. So if you want to pursue these challenges, like you have to fuel yourself accordingly, right? And that's an everyday thing. Like that's just not even during training, right? Like you have to find what works for you in order for you to do the things that you want to do, right? Like you can't just like yo-yo up and down. And again, that's very nuanced, but that was something that really helped me was like just finding an approach to nutrition that wasn't restrictive, right? That wasn't like saying I can't have this or I can't have that, but it was allowed me to eat the things that I wanted to eat and still allowed me to perform at the level that I wanted to. So that was more of like a lifestyle thing than anything.
Yeah, definitely. Are there any kind of top tips food wise that you give people to say, oh, do you know what, if there's one thing you should change in your diet or a couple of things you should change, these are the ones you should definitely look at doing?
Oh man, well, I'm not a nutritionist, so I will, state that now. But I've tested a few things, and like I'm not a fan of restricting, like saying like oh I can only have like this amount or this amount. You know what I mean? I think that like that can lead to a lot of unhealthy relationships with food because like food's meant to be enjoyed. Like you want to enjoy it. The food, it's good. Eat it. And so I would just say like focus on things that you like and adjust it accordingly so you are able to perform and do the things that you want to do, right? Like if your goal is not to run an Ironman and your goal is to run just a 10K every year, then that nutritional approach is gonna look vastly different.
Yeah.
So just focus on like what you want to do and what you want your body to do. And then find like a nutrition strategy or an approach to nutrition that fits within that.
Yeah. No, that makes that makes a lot of sense. I'm always probably hilariously hit and miss with my nutrition in that I have 1 week of being fantastic and the next of being absolutely terrible. But I suppose we're all a little bit like that.
Yeah, and I think like if you do want to use like numbers, I always follow like an 80-20 rule, right? Like 80% of the time I'm eating rice, chicken, broccolis, vegetables, fruit, and then the 20% of the time, man, I'm putting down a frozen pizza. Or I'm having like 2 or 3 donuts, and that's okay. Like I'm not going to lose sleep over that.
Yeah, definitely. And just to finish off, Jake, because we're sadly running out of time. What's coming up on Working Order? What can people look forward to if they head over to the Substack there?
Oh man, so a lot of great things. So continuing to tell the stories, continuing to refine those, and if anybody out there is interested in speaking about something they've done, I'm more than happy to talk. And if you know of anybody that fits that bill, happy to chat. Continuing to build out the training programs and offering those to people. Continuing to refine like the podcast, but then something else that like I've excited about that I've started to kind of put down on paper is this idea of like a cohort or like more of like a community to where people that really want to take on this idea of like training and knocking out a challenge a year, we can join in this community and we can support one another, and we have access to training programs and resources and nutritional support. And then we also have access to like other athletes and other people that have done things, and they can share their story, they can share their lessons. And so really kind of bringing the community to life. So I would say that's kind of the biggest thing that's on the horizon right now.
Well, I love that because I love the idea of, again, it's all about a bit of collaboration, which is what we're doing today, as well as hopefully sharing some great stories along the way. But it's again, isn't it, that idea of everybody taking that extra step along their own journeys.
Exactly. In whatever adventure lies on your horizon. I would just say like that there's just that first step is the most crucial, and I wish you the best because objects in me are closer than they appear, right? That adventure is closer than you think.
Fantastic. Well, Jake, that's a really nice place for us to finish today's chat. Thank you so much for joining us on Running Tales. This will be live as a podcast on Thursday, folks. So listen out for that. Listen to all the other wonderful stories we have on the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network, because there are some superb shows on that. Check out Jake's Substack and everything he does, because honestly, it's really good. We'll put lots of links everywhere for you. And once again, thank you so much for joining us today on the Running Tales podcast.
Yeah, this was wonderful. Thank you.